I'll say hello first then, as I'm trying to keep everyone in check. I'm Charlotte. I'm the UK associate editor of the Mac Observer, and I'm here in London. And we're very excited. It's a very exciting panel. I'm getting to try and moderate is probably a too strong a word, because they're going to be very well behaved. They've promised me, and so we can. And we're going to crack one. We've got Mac, the co-founder and lead developer, which is an award we'll get maybe in a minute, but market and commercial efforts of one of the fastest growing software companies here in the UK. I'm glad that we've got 2 bits of UK representation here at the moment. And we've got Dennis Zhadanov, who is the vice president at Readdle, which has popular productivity apps like Spark, Scanner Pro, PDF export and document. We've got a total of 100 million users. And we've got Oleksandr Kosovan as well, who's the CEO and founder at MacPaw, who I'm sure will be joining us and have lots to say, because there was a lot to discuss yesterday. So I don't know, do you guys want to, I was going to let you guys sort of freeform, but actually I'm going to be a bit more strict. And I'm going to ask you to kick off. We'll go through one by one. What was the biggest announcement for you yesterday, but that wasn't Apple Silicon? Because we're going to discuss that separately. So you can name something else that you thought was the biggest deal. And before the speakers start, can I ask all the others who are non-speakers, if you're joining us, please do be on mute so we don't interrupt our speakers as well. So I'm going to go on mute and start with what you thought was the biggest announcement yesterday beyond Apple Silicon.
Yeah, so hello everyone again. So yesterday's event was pretty exciting. First time like remote event. It felt a bit differently than previously, but still there were so many great releases. I expected some more radical releases, but there were no super big surprises for me. So Apple Silicon was rumored a long time before, and it was really expected. So it was great release. But the things that was interesting for me personally, there were so many details that they probably even didn't mention during the keynote. But they shared during the State of the Union keynote, etc. Like, for example, so they changed the way developers can challenge App Store review guidelines, for example. This was nice and not very expected improvement over the App Store procedures. What was good personally for me is in the update for the Safari, this browser so far, and they added so many cool new details that probably were there before in other browsers, but finally they come into Safari as well. Like, for example, the live translation. I was big fan of that on Chrome, but now finally I can use it on Safari as well. And so many other details like better privacy, fresher look, etc.
Very good. Christian, what came out for you beyond Apple Silicon yesterday?
So I think like the one really small detail that I'm embarrassingly excited about is just like threaded iMessages.
Right. I have to tell you, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we did get quite excited. I did a little cheer because one of my bugbears for quite a while now has been quite how horrible Messages is. And seeing it updated, including the inline replies that you've just mentioned, was genuinely very exciting. I agree with you.
Yeah, I think that's sort of my highlight, just because it's something that I find some way to complain about probably every other day when somebody iMessages me instead of WhatsApps me. So maybe that kind of trend will reverse now. In terms of I think like other announcements. It'd be interesting to see how people use app clips sort of to build out new functionality. I think all of us have been in the situation where we've flown to sort of San Jose and tried to go on one of the scooters and then just had to spend like the first 15 minutes of that experience downloading a super heavyweight app and signing up. So I think that'll be a really interesting experience for things like these sort of like shared bikes and scooters and things. So I thought those were kind of two sort of reasonable highlights from it for me. Obviously, there's a ton of stuff on Silicon and things like that was also super exciting that I'm sure we'll get onto later.
We certainly will. Who should we have next? I think should we have Dennis? Dennis, what was your take on things?
I really like the app clips, so I really think this is very powerful for everybody who's in e-commerce and like business that has physical presence. And I'm still sure that we as like software developers can get creative about that, on how people can use our apps and consume bits of it, interacting with real life. Personally, I think for the majority of users, I'm very happy what they've done with this organization of the apps. I have probably 7 or 8 screens of apps. And
you mean they invented Android? You're excited about Android coming to iOS?
Well, it's just
controversial.
Excuse me being controversial and cynical. So
no, it's fine. It's fine. It solves my problem. So I don't mind
totally
Android or Windows. It solves my problem.
Yeah.
As developers of Spark, the email, I'm super pumped about the ability to make the default email apps.
Stop, because I was going to ask you. Yes, I'm going to ask you about that specifically because I use Spark and it was the first thing I thought of when I saw that announcement and wrote a story about it. So I'm going to come back to you to talk about that specifically in a little bit. But I agree with you; it's very exciting.
And I personally like this new idea and the new design of the new macOS Big Sur. It feels like iPad-ish, but I still want to play with it. I haven't played with it yet, but I think there is something there, and it's interesting to see how unified the experiences and the platform becomes. So we'll see what kind of happens with that and how developers react and how we all adopt our apps to meet those new guidelines for design and interactions.
Very good. And last but by no means least, Max, what did you take away most yesterday?
Well, certainly the biggest deal was the new UI in terms of what the work we have to put in right now. And I would say, to put in some controversy, give it 5 years and we won't have macOS anymore. We will see the continuum of iPad and Mac become single platform with iOS, just one single OS. Yeah. And then StoreKit testing. I mean, those of you who do App Store subscriptions, it's been a hell before, and I'm so excited to try it out. I haven't tried it yet, but it looks so good.
Yeah, the timing of that with everything that's going on with the Hey email app is also very interesting, I thought.
It's pure coincidence. You can't roll that kind of feature within 3 days. They've been working on that for a year.
I think that's probably fair. And so, right, let's turn to the big, we'll come on to Big Sur, but let's talk first of all about the kind of big moment that we had. And we knew it was coming. I'd been writing about it for weeks, expected to announce a transition to its own chips, ARM chips. Why, as developers, are you, I assume you're all excited about it, you seem excited about it. Are you, tell me, and please tell me if you think there are going to be issues that come up, but why is this such a big deal for you, and how will it change, and perhaps for the better or worse, what the kind of work you do? We'll kick off with you, Dennis.
Okay, I guess I was muted. So the question was about the whole announcement, or about?
Yeah, what? But I'm interested to you. We know why it's a big deal for Apple, and indeed Intel. But why is it a big deal for you guys who are making the apps that will be using on the devices powered by Apple Silicon?
So I believe we had this call today with the team and we discussed a few things. And since this transition will take a couple of years, we will still continue doing what we're doing. And as of right now, we have no plans on building on this and the Apple Silicon right now, because it doesn't make sense for us. at the moment. Maybe within a couple of months or next year, because the number of new Macs will be very limited, very, very, very small. I'm more excited about this Catalyst thing that allows us to build and port the apps from Mac to iPad, and it's pretty cool that they've chosen to demo our Documents app for State of the Union. And I'm definitely thinking about this, our calendars on Mac as this #1 request. And Apple really making those things easier. But just not talking about ourselves, I think for many companies and many developers who have more of a content-driven apps, think of Calm or Headspace or any kind of news or e-commerce sites and kind of content-based apps, porting that to Mac and reaching the new audience is very compelling, and it's very easy to do.
Yeah, I think I'm really pleased you brought up Catalyst, because it kind of was mentioned almost in passing, but actually for developers, for me that seems like, and obviously I'm a journalist, I'm not a developer, but to me that seemed like a really huge deal.
Let's ask the other guys. I'm curious about Macs. Are you guys keeping your Mac app, or are you porting your iPad one? And what's your strategy?
No Catalyst for me, definitely. I think the apps that we've seen up to now and up to last week, the developer app clearly show that building a great Mac app is not possible with Catalyst. I would say we have to wait 1 or 2 more years until SwiftUI is in a state where we can just build truly native cross-platform apps at very high level. I mean, I think for those content-driven apps, it's a good option to have Catalyst, but for really experience-driven apps like ours, it's Catalyst is not the option. Yeah, and I'm curious to see how SwiftUI will evolve, and maybe we're there already. I haven't looked into it this week now, but I would soon think that we will be able to just have one code base for everything, but that won't be Catalyst.
Sorry to jump in on this, but just a commentary on it. With Apple Silicon for powering Mac,
I want to go back
iOS apps directly. I mean, I just want to say, is there a real reason to do Catalyst anymore? If your iPhone app or iPad app just runs natively on a Mac, is there a real need to port to the Mac app?
Yes, because the issue is that they will sell the new Macs with the new Silicon by the end of the year, and this will be very low numbers and just like single-digit percentage of the market. But if you do make an port for your app, you want to cater to the all audience of Macs, right?
Yeah,
and it's not only about the silicon, because there are so many different frameworks on Mac and iOS that you have to support to have a better user experience. So you have to port like some of the applications and change the experience to the Mac.
I would also jump in there and point out that while there was lots of talk and excitement about Apple Silicon and the developer kits that are being sent out with a Mac Mini as part, it's worth pointing out Tim Cook, I think he said, there are going to be new Macs with Intel chips on the way. So
sure.
it's not exactly that have been in the pipeline for a long time. It's not. They said the transition is going to be 2 years. Obviously, in that transition, devices that are still using the Intel chip. So it's not like a clean break at this point, is it? For any of you guys, you're going to have to balance working across all those things.
I would say for developers, most apps, I would say almost most apps, it's truly just a checkbox to just compile for the new chips. I would think that Apple will only ship new Macs when they truly make a big difference to the current models. For example, double the battery life and price to performance or something like that. So this is why they expect it to take 2 years. I guess they will start at the smallest ones, reintroduce the 12-inch MacBook with like all-day 24-hour battery life or something like that, and then only later scale to the bigger machines as they catch up on processing power. Because that's, I think, the main weakness right now still is that they're very power efficient, but they're not fastest ever. And as long as their own silicon is only equally as fast as Intel silicon, they won't be doing the switch.
I think as well that the lowest risk kind of cohort of Mac users sort of to roll out to initially are going to be like MacBook Air users. Sort of, I don't think that they're going to risk rolling out kind of Pro models, which are obviously super high margin for Apple. And if it's only like an incremental improvement over sort of what we can get right now with the current kind of sort of selection of MacBook Pros. And I mean, it wasn't that sort of long ago that sort of a lot of those models have been refreshed anyway.
Yeah, and you've also got things like the Mac. People spend a lot of money on. Has obviously doesn't have this chip because it didn't exist. It was released long before. So yeah, I think you're right that it was notable, wasn't it? That, as I say, that the developer kit included a Mac Mini, not one of what you would define as a Pro device, perhaps.
Well, it's clear because the hardware they have, they just took an iPad and put it into the smallest casing they have that doesn't pose any thermal issues and any casing implications. So any laptop would have required a lot of integration on their side. That's why they just, with the last transition, they took a Pentium 4 and put it in PowerMac G5 enclosure that was almost empty.
So, question: do you guys believe that next year or in 2 years we'll see the MacBooks with the touchscreen?
While you're all pondering this, there was something I wanted to throw out to you guys as developers, which is we've talked about some of the good stuff we saw yesterday, some of the stuff you're excited about, or indeed not, perhaps not so excited about, or don't think will affect you just yet. But was there anything you were actually actively left disappointed by that we saw yesterday? That maybe some missed opportunities, some features that are still not there that you really want. I'm going to start. Let's go through with Oleksandr first.
Yeah, so the one thing I was really disappointed is probably it's the end of the era of macOS X, like probably the last legacy from Steve Jobs. So this macOS X will be, or not X, it will be 11 or 12 even. I don't know. I think 12. So it's
11. It's 11. Yeah, there was a bit of confusion whether it was 10.16 or 11, but it was in fact.
Yeah, it will be 11. So it's good, but it's kind of disappointing because you feel some of the legacies left behind.
And Christian, for you, what left you slightly underwhelmed, if anything?
I think I was like reasonably happy with sort of the whole thing. I think all of these announcements, sort of, I stopped being disappointed at WWDC presentations probably about 3 or 4 years ago. Like when you sit there and you just like, there's all the stuff that you hope for. And I've kind of like, I've now just resigned to the fact that I'm just going to be on a wild ride. And there was some stuff in this one that we knew was coming. So I think that sort of like, I think if some of that stuff that we've been talking about and thinking about for the last like 6 months hadn't come, then that would have been really disappointing. Sort of oftentimes like we get that. But I think this time around, sort of like some of the stuff was surprising and like in a good way in terms of, I think sort of some of the new changes to iOS are really good. I think some of the new changes to macOS are good. I agree with Max entirely on sort of, this is probably the beginning of the end for sort of kind of Mac being this sort of completely distinct, separate sort of platform. To Oleksandr's point as well, around kind of that being the last sort of legacy of Steve Jobs and moving away from OS X and sort of things like that. So, I mean, yeah, no real disappointment kind of overall.
And how about for you, Dennis? Were there any real kind of moments that you were really disappointed by?
Not really. I agree with Christian on that. Like, to be disappointed, you have to have some expectations. So usually what I do, I don't make any expectations and I just go with the flow and see what happens. And then we had a couple of surprises and I was more of a disappointed.
You should cross your fingers and hope you don't get Sherlocked. It's fine.
Yeah.
That happened 2 years ago, so we're fine.
Yeah.
And for you, Max, was there anything that really left you kind of underwhelmed?
Well, there's one thing that Dennis touched on, like the question before with the touchscreen Macs, is have you ever used an iPhone app in the simulator on a Mac with a mouse? It's horrible. Of any kind of app, I mean, Electron apps are better than iPhone apps in the simulator on a Mac. So why would you want to run iPhone and iPad apps on a Mac with a mouse? Doesn't make any sense. So Catalyst is the bare minimum you can do, like implement scroll wheel interactions. Will those come to these iOS apps? I don't know. Or will we have touchscreen Macs? And definitely the end of the Mac as we know it. I don't know. So only like big question mark. The left. Yeah. When I went out of the keynote, like, what is it? What is that? Where's that going?
I feel like you can just see these lines blurring between Mac and certainly iPad OS. Sort of like the sort of slightly not shocking introduction of sidebars on iPad OS, sort of being kind of to get that consistency between kind of Mac OS and iPad OS. I think sort of was entirely unsurprising. And I wonder if you're going to have sort of like the worst of both worlds kind of thing of sort of iOS apps sort of being particularly difficult to use on Mac OS because they're built for touch, and sort of the inverse on kind of iPad, for example, of like starting to have all of these UI elements that are built for a mouse or a trackpad that you're now having to use with sort of fat fingers.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, you could argue that when we saw the kind of latest iPad Pros, there was a bit of that in it with the reassigned cursor, perhaps as well.
Well, actually, it's quite good. Like the touchpad on the latest iPads, it's very good, and maybe they will add some of this functionality to the Macs. Then, yeah.
So I want to get Dennis's perspective on allowing the third-party default email apps and browsers. And while Dennis is telling me his thoughts on that, which I suspect go along the lines of woohoo, I would like, there are people who may want to ask questions. We're going to have a little Q&A section just after Dennis has answered. So please do put your hand up over in the Slack chat if you want to ask our lovely panelists a question. But go on, Dennis, tell me why. I was very pleased because I use Spark. Now tell me why you, as the maker of Spark, are so pleased about in iOS 14, and we think iPad OS, they're going to allow you to change your default email and browser app.
I think that's a big nod towards the antitrust, and that's the rumors were there, right? Mark Gurman from Bloomberg raised this like half a year ago, and we were expecting that. And of course, that's very user friendly, and I'm happy because it's just better user experience for our users. We have at about 2 million monthly active users, and that was one of the biggest kind of inconveniences on the platform. And now when you tap on the email anywhere while you're browsing or like anywhere on your iPhone or iPad, you can compile a message from Spark. So that's great for everybody who's making emails. And the interesting thing is that I've seen the reports, The Verge confirmed that it's not working outside of the box. There has to be something done by developers, by us. I don't think that's a lot of work, but still, we will do some adjustment and iterations to make sure that on day one, our users can do that.
Very good. Did any of you else have different thoughts on this? Otherwise, I'm going to throw to our lovely audience who've been sitting patiently and I'm sure bursting with questions for you.
I'm just entirely delighted that I'm never going to have that experience when it's sort of like kind of open your email app and it opens up and then tells me from the App Store.
Yeah.
And
that's fun. And also when you
what
press
about
a link
maps? Did they add the same functionality for maps?
No. No, we can come up. So there's your disappointment now.
But I think when you go for your directions, you have like options, and you can choose from Google Maps, Apple Maps, and Waze. Like
you can navigate in different ways, but obviously it always wants you to use the default, their apps as default. Now I'm going to go to our lovely audience. Now I know that one of the people that has their hand up is Adrian Eves. So what's your question, Adrian?
Well, I was trying to chime in with one of the things that was initially disappointing about the conference, but it's not so much anymore. And I'm sure you guys have heard that that a lot of people were expecting Xcode for the iPad, and I was definitely, and I was a little disappointed yesterday. But after having a lot of time to go over it in my head, I realized that Xcode 12 is pretty great, and we're very fortunate to want it for the iPad because it's so good on Mac that we can easily take it for granted, if that makes sense. And with all the stuff they've brought to Xcode 12, I would much rather them make that awesome experience as great as it can before it touches the iPad, because it would be more disappointing to me personally if the iPad experience of Xcode left a lot to be desired.
Do any of our panelists have any thoughts on that? Because I'm also going to ask you specifically. You obviously read my mind, Adrian, because actually Xcode 12 was one of the next things I wanted to talk about, because I think that is a very big deal. So was there anything directly related to Adrian's points and questions that any of you guys on the panel wanted to respond to?
I have two 27-inch screens on my Mac. They are full of code and navigation items, all much smaller than they could be on the iPad. I don't know. I can't even imagine going beyond the playground on an iPad for anything really. Like, what are you going to do there? So it's just, give it 3 years or so, maybe then when Mac and iPad have become the same, then maybe we can have Xcode on iPad. But I don't know what you want to do with it on iPad.
Someone in our chat said you could use Sidecar to use Xcode on an iPad. Would you fancy doing that, Max? You fancy?
Why? I mean, you run your app when you develop it. You just deploy it on the iPad and then use it there on two different devices to stop and continue and inspect. So I don't know.
Now, does anyone else over in Zoom want to raise a hand for questions? There will be another point for questions in a few minutes later, but if anyone has anything they want now, Oleksandr Marchenko has a question for us.
Yeah, hello. I have a question for Denise Zhadanov. We all saw documents by Readdle being featured very prominently in yesterday's State of the Union. So I was wondering, does it help for your business? How good it is for you, for the sales, to be featured in an event of such caliber? Thank you.
I don't think it necessarily drives the direct downloads and sales and revenue. It does help the awareness though, and I have a couple of good guys and big investors reaching out saying, good job guys, and so on. But that's mostly, I think, for brand awareness. And it's just great to see that at Apple, that's being picked. And usually these things are picked by the senior leadership, let's put it this way. And it's just good to see on Be on the Radar and continue doing great apps. And that's just the, I'd say, branding and awareness, and not really revenue. Especially Documents is free. And to give it perspective, Documents is pretty popular. We got over 1 million monthly downloads organically every month. So like, if we have 200 people getting out of this presentation, that's not very much. So.
Very good. And I believe we had our final question for this little bit of Q&A was from Oscar Lopoweski. And I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, Oscar. Maybe you've answered, maybe our wonderful panelists have answered Oscar's question. So I'm going to go on, and actually I was going to hope, actually, if we could dig a bit more into Xcode 12, because obviously it wasn't really featured in the keynote, but there's been a press release that's come out. It was obviously a part of the State of the Union. What were your big takeaways from seeing some of the features announced in Xcode 12? Oleksandr, why don't you start for us?
It's hard to tell, actually. So the new store queue tool probably is a great way to simulate subscription setup and in-app purchases before shipping it to customers. I think it's a great addition. Besides that, I don't think I have anything to add.
Christian, for you, do you think it will change how you work? Will it improve how you work? Will it make your life easier? Or is it actually just going to be more of the same?
I think so. I mean, the last time that I touched Xcode was probably about 6 years ago, and then I was just trying to get it to stop crashing every like 8 minutes. So I think, sort of in terms of reading through it, I think the store kit testing stuff was sort of the most significant kind of addition that was even kind of like relevant to our business and sort of what we do. Obviously, dealing with lots of sort of subscriptions and things like that for Mac apps. And it's good to see sort of like some of that stuff catch up to what you're able to do outside of the store. I think, yeah, that's the biggest thing for me.
And for you, Dennis?
I guess we're going to be seeing and digging more during this week. So usually we are very cautious with predictions, and the team usually just attends all the labs and sessions. And by the end of Friday, we would like compile a big like all hands meeting reports, and then we're going to discuss that. So I think we'll get just to discover interesting things.
And were you, just out of interest, were you disappointed we didn't get Xcode for the iPad?
I wasn't. No.
You were.
I don't code myself, to be honest. So I'm like.
And for you, Max, I know you weren't disappointed about not being able to code on your iPad, but were you happy with what we got with Xcode 12?
I have to. I mean, I do code, but I haven't looked at it in depth. But one thing about it is it has a new icon, and that tells me we have to do a new icon as well, I guess. So we got 3 months to make a new icon, and everybody's gonna make new icons.
Yeah, you see, I'm sort of laughing, but actually that can, take up some time, take up some resources.
Well, definitely. I mean, the last time we made an icon, it took us 9 months.
Right.
So, and the designer was a nerve wreck afterwards, I guess.
So, for this last little bit before perhaps we go to another Q&A, because I'm sure there's lots of stuff people who are watching want to ask you guys. What the other big thing we had iOS 14, which we've dug into a bit, but perhaps the biggest thing, and we've only kind of glanced over it so far, was macOS Big Sur. Now, I enjoyed them admitting that this came from slightly out of hand trips from the marketing team that the name came from, but it's a big overhaul. It's a very substantial change in terms of what macOS is going to look like. I suspect it's a big difference in how we're going to interact with macOS in lots of ways. So what did you guys think as you started seeing images of it, started seeing some of the features shown by some of the speakers? What did you guys think macOS Big Sur? Christian, I'm going to put you in the hot seat first.
I think like it's my initial reaction to it was like, this is just desktop iPad. Like it's kind of
right.
Like we've gone sort of full circle. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think kind of overall sort of the UI is really interesting. I think sort of it's going to drive a lot more consistency between kind of iOS, sort of iPad OS and Mac there. I think sort of I haven't dug into sort of like the OS specific kind of differences beyond kind of things like having kind of control center and things like that on Mac, which is going to be nice. I think just like some of the sort of specific things on individual apps that have been done, I think are exciting. Sort of obviously, but I think the biggest thing in this was actually the level of consistency between like the new announcements for iOS and the new announcements for like macOS. I think we're going to get to a point now where sort of I think macOS is going to feel a little bit less like a second-class citizen in Apple's eyes, because sort of they're trying to bridge the gap between all these platforms. So I feel like the biggest thing for me was sort of, even if it means sort of consequentially, like at some point in the future, we're going to have kind of a very different macOS experience. I think the thing it means for me is sort of this WWDC, next WWDC, we're probably going to see Mac progress at a similar rate to we're now seeing iOS progress in terms of new functionality and things. That was the most exciting thing for me.
Yeah, and I do wonder if we are I've seen some people saying it in the Zoom group chat. You guys have hinted at it. I do wonder if we're moving into a kind of Apple OS world, where it's all gonna just be much of a muchness, and things kind of work across platform, across device, and so on?
I think the biggest question that's going to come out of that is sort of what is the obviously we've always been in this world of like this kind of bifurcated world between like kind of Mac OS and the other like XOSs sort of that Apple has, sort of in regard to sort of third-party applications and sort of like forcing the App Store. And it'll be interesting to understand which direction that goes in. I think like Apple's hopeful direction is obviously that everything goes towards the App Store on kind of Mac. Sort of obviously this antitrust stuff that's kind of potentially happening as well. I think the biggest thing isn't going to be like whether we end up with kind of Apple OS or not. It's whether like we have that fundamental shift of everything is in Apple's walled garden, or sort of almost nothing is, in terms of like opening up the other devices to allow kind of third-party applications outside of the stores.
Yeah. Dennis, did you have anything to add on the kind of way the move towards Big Sur and so on?
I really like how it looks and how it feels, and it feels more modern. And I don't think it fundamentally changes the way macOS works. So we've got all the power of macOS still, yet it looks much more modern and consistent with our iPad experience. I'm wondering how these widgets will work, and I want to play with them to have them on my home screen, because some of you guys know that I love kind of the whole productivity, efficiency stuff, and being reminded what's important and having that on the home screen all the time seems like a neat idea. And I agree with Christian that if it progresses the same way and at the same pace as iOS, that's going to be very neat. And I'm not a big fan of new icons though, for some reason. I don't know. Those shades just
interesting. It's interesting that you've already started to call it home screen rather than desktop.
Yes.
Like, it's in 12 hours.
You'll get used to the icons.
Yeah, I know. We'll get used to that.
We got used to iOS 7 icons very quickly.
Yeah.
We get used to things quickly.
So go on then, Max. What was your takeaway from seeing it?
So for me, it was clear that we would get SF symbols on the Mac this year. With the introduction last year, it was absolutely obvious that Apple wouldn't do any single more new icon on the Mac in a different style than SF symbols. I would say we gained some and we lost some. So some of the toolbars look a bit dull, but it's the first take on a new paradigm, just like iOS 7, and then we're gonna see iterations over the next few years. So yeah, I think we've got used to it, and it's a big shift, moving everything together. You can not really now, but it's much more similar now than it used to be a few years ago. And designing similar features for all the platforms becomes more easy as platforms become more similar. So it's a way for Apple to make it easier for everybody to ship apps across all their platforms and make sure everything's available everywhere.
Now, Oleksandr, I obviously associate MacPaw with Setapp, and I associate Setapp with my Mac. I have iStats menu running at the moment. I have various features within Setapp running the whole time, in fact. So I'm wondering if for you this change, the change of macOS is perhaps more significant. Am I right? Am I wrong? What did you make of it all?
Yeah, so the first impression, it was like very iPadish, like so the whole interface and experience. But on the second thought, it will open an opportunity to port so many great apps from the iPad to the Mac, because according to our research, there are actually not that many great apps on the Mac comparing to other platforms, and this will be a really great opportunity to port like great apps and increase the competition on this platform. So this is a good thing for users. It will be probably more complicated for Mac developers to survive here because of the bigger competition. But in the very end, it will be good for everyone.
I think that's a really good point, actually, because when you say to people, ask people about their favorite apps or what apps they use every day and those kind of things, people immediately associate that normally with iPhone and then by extension a bit iPad. We don't, I think for a lot of, you say this in inverted commas, normal users, they don't particularly think of Mac apps. There might be some programs they use on apps, but I don't think they think of them as apps in the same way. And I wonder if, in the way you're saying, Oleksandr, that change will change also user thinking.
So the Mac apps are usually more powerful. There is more functionality, and the things how you can interact between other apps is historically more powerful on the Mac. So I hope over time this difference will be less compared to the iPad apps as well, because gradually Apple is adding missing functionality like drag and drop and multitasking, multi-windows, etc. Yeah.
So actually, it could actually work to the benefit of developers on iPadOS and iOS as well, that their apps, they could be able to introduce more functionality to their apps, you think?
Yeah.
What's you guys take on that? Christian, do you think I was on something here?
Oh, I think 100%. I think if you think like what was the catalyst for like the iPhone becoming,
see what you did there,
like dominant, is I did. I actually didn't. That was not intentional at all. I said catalyst. But like the iPhone was like apps on the iPhone were the reason that it became sort of so significant and is the like powerhouse it is today. Obviously, we've had apps on the Mac for such a long time. And the Mac App Store was an initial kind of way for discoverability and things like that within that. And obviously, kind of last year, we saw sort of the redesign there, and that hopefully become more significant. But I think I don't think kind of laptops and sort of desktop computers are going away anytime soon. But potentially, kind of this sort of more significant sort of consistency between these devices probably results in people expecting similar experiences on desktop as they do on kind of iPad and iOS. And especially when you consider like there's going to be a generation of like people who have only ever really grown up on an iPad, and sort of when they get their work computer, sort of does that then kind of engender that like same behavior that they've had of like immediately I want to solve a problem, like go and download an app to solve it. But sort of does that then kind of translate to the Mac? And I mean hopefully, and then sort of we have this kind of new wave of kind of like success for developers on a new platform.
Yes, and for you, Max, what's your take? Do you think the guys are onto something?
Just as you talked about it, I got the thought that on the iPhone, Apple has a very big market share. On the iPad, they have very big market share. For the watch business, they have like almost the entire market. But for the Mac, for the desktop computers, they only still have like 10%, 8% worldwide, 5%, I don't know, really little. So maybe they're realizing this is the market where they can grow. And then now they want to get some of the fairy dust from iOS, from iPhone, to re-spark the Mac growth, and that brought it into the situation it's today. I mean, the insane Mac growth in the early 2000s just revitalized Apple, and maybe they're gonna kick that up again.
And do you think that will, Max, it will change how you approach, how you and your teams develop apps and products?
I don't know. I can't say that. So it's too early. So we can reflect on that next year.
Okay. You've heard it here first. Max is coming back this time next year, and he's going to tell us all the things that have changed. And for you, Dennis, what was your thoughts on it all?
I don't think I can have something to add.
So Dennis is coming back next year as well, and he's going to tell us.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't change the way we work. It doesn't change we think about products and business and consumers. So fundamentals are still there. Are there new handy things to possibly ship faster? Yes, maybe. Does it affect our business big time? Probably not.
Yeah,
all those changes are gradual. You have to know all those changes are gradual. And if you look back, like 2 years ago or 3 years ago or 4 years ago, how different business was 3 or 4 years ago. then you know how far we've come. And right now it's difficult to say where we're gonna go. Only that we sort of know we're gonna be in one single big platform in a few years, maybe, probably.
We assume.
So do you think that the platform, the macOS and iPadOS, the Mac Store, the Apple Store, the App Store, and the Mac Store will essentially merge and will be like just one store?
I mean, you will have iPhone apps in the store. Makes any sense? It just knows how on the iTunes music billing system from the 90s.
Going to get me going on one of my big irritations, which is that you still have to go into like sometimes the music app, and the way of cancelling subscriptions and stuff is still feels like they still think of iTunes, even though they made a big
And actually, there is another strong thread going on, like competition between native apps and web apps or cloud apps. And probably, especially for the professional market, we'll end up with a browser on any platform and web applications for any business use case. This is like another strong trend that's going on right now.
I think
consumers
that's
prefer just native apps, right?
Yeah, we prefer native apps because they have better user experience, but still, like there is a huge benefit, especially in cooperation when you use web applications.
I think the lines are blurring, and I think like you see it with things like Slack, where it's like you can basically just use it everywhere that you want to use Slack. But I think the thing that we probably will, I hope that we see, is you have like the web version, but they have desktop kind of and mobile is actually four different places.
I like that optimistic note on which to end this little part. I have a few questions that have been sent in privately from you, from some people viewing. Now, we're going to go to another Q&A just before we go out into breakout rooms. So if you again have a question you want to ask the guys, do put your hand up using the raise hand function in Zoom. But a couple of questions. One from Oscar Lopowaski. Would you guys actually want to use touchscreen Macs? Now, I'm going to answer this one, and I'm going to say no. Because I spend a lot of my time writing, and I don't think, so that's one thing that just is not relevant to me. The other things I do is obviously editing audio and video, and my trackpad does that far more neatly and adeptly than I think a touch screen could. But I'm prepared for one of you to tell me I'm wrong. So Dennis, am I right? Am I wrong? Do you want a touchscreen Mac?
I don't like when it's dirty, and this will definitely make it dirty. And I have a little bit of OCD, so I don't know. That's the problem. But maybe for some use cases, basically I think we will have both, but potentially we'll have both touchscreen and the mouse cursor. So basically, for some cases, maybe working with your fingers on the screen makes sense. I don't know. We'll see.
And obviously, I think the obvious indication of that is the iPad Pro, which, to all intents and purposes, particularly with where we're seeing macOS go, to me feels like a touchscreen laptop now.
It's like Microsoft Surface, right? When you can like take off your and like iPad Pro.
I think Tim Cook just twitched at you saying that, but I think you're possibly onto something. Alexander, do you want a touchscreen Mac?
No, because I use a lot of shortcuts and keyboard in order to do things, and I think it's much more effective than move your finger all over the screen, especially if it's a big screen.
But is that because that's what we're used to doing, and actually we might find we've been wrong all these years?
Well, I don't think it could be replaced with hand gestures, possibly.
and Christian, what's your take?
If
we get touchscreen Macs in the UK, you're going to join me at Regent Street Apple Store and buy one?
I mean, if we get touchscreen Macs, I'll buy one. I just probably won't enjoy it. Like, I think kind of a lot of people on this call would probably buy one. I think that sort of we already have sort of something that looks like a touchscreen Mac, which is sort of an iPad. But I think that, like, I honestly think that not wanting a touchscreen Mac, like, we're probably going to end up in, this group is probably going to end up in the minority. Like, sort of kids are growing up. I go back to this point, but like kids are growing up on touch screens. Like, sort of, they're using this stuff much later, and like, you know, there's going to be a generation of people who have never touched a keyboard, or at least a physical one, or kind of a mouse. And I think sort of 5 years sort of from now, who knows what it's going to look like.
Okay, so but we're going to move on from that question before Christian makes me feel very, very, very old.
I add one tiny bit to that.
Yeah, please do, Max.
The key of touch interfaces is you have to keep them closer to your body than you can have a Mac. So, and that's why the iPad Pro, as we have it right now, is the key to a touchscreen Mac. The iPad Pro that we have today is your touchscreen Mac. Beef up the software 2 more years, and then you have your touchscreen Mac. You can take away the display and take it close to your body, and then put it back further away when you want to write on the keyboard.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that. I use actually an entry-level iPad with a keyboard, and to me that's effectively a very small touchscreen Mac. And the iPad Pro obviously has more screen real estate, has more power, and so on. So I think I'm inclined to agree with you on that, Max. Now, I don't know if these particularly affect, you know, they may affect your particular business, but I'm sure you have thoughts on it anyway. Do you guys have, Justin Harris wants to know if we have any thoughts about Apple glasses. Now, again, I'm beginning to change my mind on that somewhat. It might be the only way, you know, I might have been able to go to the pub quicker with some Apple glasses. But for you guys as developers, as you know, do you have any thoughts on Apple glasses? Would they affect your products? What do you make of that? Go, Max, you ended the last question. Go on, you can kick us off this time.
I have no opinion on that. So
Max is not buying some Apple glasses, I don't think.
I mean, I will, if they come out, I will buy them. I buy everything just to try it out, and then I like it or not. But I will probably also keep using them from my previous habits of getting the first Apple Watch and just keeping using it.
I'm noticing a theme. Christian, what about you? You're wearing real glasses.
As someone glasses, I would absolutely happily swap them out for some Apple glasses.
That's interesting.
The only thing that the trend that's happening, and I don't necessarily think it's a bad trend, sort of in terms of like Apple's like privacy stuff, in terms of there's a lot of prompts, like in terms of allow for an hour, allow for kind of this session, allow kind of indefinitely, and I can't quite imagine what that experience is going to be like. Like in my thing that can effectively, I guess, can see kind of question. I think that's probably, I don't think we're technically at a place where Apple couldn't build this now, and I feel like it's probably sort of actually how do you make that. Yeah, I would buy a pair. I would swap them out for the glasses that I wear every day.
There you go. Now, before I get Alexander and Dennis, just a reminder, we're getting some questions sent in privately, but it'd be nice if people wanted to join in the conversation on Zoom as well. So do use the raise your hand function I can throw to you in a couple of moments. Let's start with Alexander. What's your take on Apple glasses?
Yes, first of all, I think that gradually moving towards creating a great, first of all, friendly experience for the IR to happen.
Yeah.
Second, I have an experience using HoloLens and Magic Leap as well. And I think there is a huge challenge to solve because both of the devices I use, they are not perfect. You cannot wear them for more than half an hour. And I wonder how Apple would solve this physical or technical issue. And I hope they do. But still, I cannot imagine using them continuously. Like, for example, if I'm sitting close to my desktop, it's much more convenient to use a screen versus having a virtual screen and somehow projecting into your eyes. So it could be some very
along with your AirPods that I can see you're using.
Go for neuro. Like it's much better user experience. But I think on a serious note, like this is a really bad experience, right? Like where like this is extension of ourselves, and then we have to touch and like use our finger to type one letter. That's pretty bad. So what Apple might be doing is interesting. And by the way, guys, there is a really good report by again Mark Gurman on Bloomberg about this new AR/VR group consisted of over 1,000 engineers. So and they are working on the AR/VR headsets that is going to be shipped by the end of 2022-23. I can see like our apps, especially that we are building essential products such as email, the communication tool, right, and calendars, like how we spend our time, being very contextual and like telling me where my next appointment is, and like then showing directions, or saying, hey, like this is a VIP person emailing me, so I want to possibly reply that. But that's still a long way to go. But I'm excited about the new GUI and how we interact with the machines. And on this note, I have to apologize and say that I have another meeting right now happening, and I have to leave. And I want to
thank you to Dennis then.
Yeah, I want to thank you everybody and have a great WWDC. It's nothing like being in San Jose, and it is the first time we're not there. And thank you, Setapp and MacPaw team, for organizing that and all the speakers. It's good to see everybody, and have a good one.
It's good to see you too.
Nice, thank you for joining us, Dennis. Now,
thanks. Bye-bye.
There's been a couple more questions coming on this AR. Do you think it's going to go beyond that? Beyond the AR and VR. Max, what's your take? We've got tag. Do you think it'd be, location tags? What are you thinking?
I have not really an opinion on those. Because it's a very un-Apple way of approaching an industry, because there's no established business model right now. So they had these mobile phones before. We had these tablets and desktop PCs and watches all before, and they just came in and made the best product. And for AR, it feels like there is nothing really. I mean, there was Google Glass, but that's vanished now for years. And it feels like they're really, really pushing a technology that they maybe know where it's going to be in a few years, but I don't know where it's going to go. And so I don't really have an opinion on that.
Now, a couple of other questions. Now, do I see Ed Arenberg wants to ask us a question? Ed, did you have a question for our panel?
Yes, I did.
Jump in.
Yeah, thanks. I was curious about the whole concept of clip apps. Do you think people will be making clip-only apps? Does that seem like a possible to explore?
So I think it doesn't make a lot of sense for the developers, because you want to increase user retention inside your apps. And if you only have clip apps, there won't be like interface where you can continuously work with your customers. And this will be a huge limitation.
And what about you, Christian? What do you make of it?
Like functionality. I think like the biggest thing is sort of like with stuff like this is like I think the most obvious initial kind of implementation of it that we can imagine stuff do people just do with this new kind of form factor, if you like, of building an app. I think it's very possible that we'll end up with sort of app clip only apps. I especially think around like sort of like the most immediate ones that I can cover, like ones around transport, but where sort of there's not like a commercial kind of avenue to the transport. So things like, I think like in London, I think like TfL and the Tube, sort of obviously we've had like contactless payments and Apple Pay and things like that, but sort of is there another use case of like when I go and do that contactless thing or NFC thing, like kind of there, like it's facilitating payment, but then it's also kind of giving me like kind of delay information or stuff like that, but it's built directly sort of by TfL as opposed to like a third party app. Like I think there are use cases like that where sort of there's like pure utility to them, without necessarily this like commercial impetus to like, I want you to download this thing and use it every single day. So I think that could be super interesting, but I think the most interesting thing with app clips is like, we're just going to wait and see. And we're going to see what people build, and it's going to be fun to watch.
For you, Max, do you think we'll have clip-only apps, or do you think it's always going to be part of a bigger picture?
It really depends on the kind of business that you run. Just kicking in with the others. I mean, if you want to build a business around a software, then clip apps is a lead generation way of thing. But if you have physical goods like scooters or anything, then you want to have as low of a barrier as possible. I don't know if those kind of companies would run clip-only apps. I don't see the real point of not having the rest of the app as well, or having it permanently installed. But yeah, we'll have to see.
Yeah. I think we'll see app clip apps for like data transfer, like sort of like more kind of enriched data transfer. When like you look at the documentation for app clips, sort of you have access to sort of like health kit data and things like that. Of like, I can imagine going into like a doctor's office where I probably wouldn't download my doctor's office's app, but I might then kind of use app clips as like a method of like actually transferring health kit data to an app that they use. But so I think there is some utility in them like that, but I think, yeah, we'll see.
Are there any other questions that our audience want to ask? Anyone want to raise their hand or just jump in? As we're getting to the sort of the end. Before we're going to break up into some breakout rooms at the moment. They're just being sorted out. But if anyone has some questions for our panelists, speak now or forever hold your peace, as they say. Well, go on, Roma, I'm not even going to, apologies, I'm not even going to try and pronounce your surname, but Roma, go on, what's your question? You've got your hand raised.
It's okay. Thanks for the event.
Well done for making it to California. You've done very well.
Yes. And my question is, Apple show the translation application, and it's interesting to hear your thoughts about how it will affect the market of these applications. And what will you do if you will be a developer of this application? What you should do?
So for our last way round, I'm going to let Oleksandr answer first.
Yeah, first of all, it depends on the engine they use, because so far Apple was not very good with speech recognition, at least for me in Siri. So Google was much better. And so I don't think that Apple could beat Google here. And this is one thing. Another thing, Google provides an open APIs for that, and I don't think Apple will do that for any other developers. So there is still a market for similar apps on the platform.
And for you, Max, do you have a take on translation apps? Would you use them? Do you like what Apple's doing with them? Does it get you thinking about it from a developer perspective?
I mean, the underlying question that you always have is, what is if you get Sherlocked, right? That's translation apps right now getting Sherlocked by the translation service of Apple. And having a default solution. So I would say the opportunity that as a developer you have to take is you have to distinguish yourself by functionality. and just make the better product. Apple will always aim for the broad market, for a wide set of customers, and if you have a product in that space, try to like go to a niche or go to a certain kind of customer, and build a certain kind of model around it.
And for you, Christian, this is gonna be our last question, so you can have the final word, and then we're gonna go into breakout rooms. And just so you know, my answer is that will no longer be recorded or streamed live on Facebook, so you can all take a deep breath and just have a nice private chat. But Christian, translation, if you were making one, would you be worried about getting shadowlocked? Do you think it's a good step forward in iOS?
I mean, no pressure being the last person, but I think
it's all on you, Christian.
Yeah, some words of wisdom or something. I think like sort of I think Apple have Sherlocked many people in the past, and sort of people have still been able to build solid businesses and kind of products around features that already exist natively. I think if Dennis was still here, like there is a mail app on the phone, there is a calendar app on the phone, and they've been incredibly successful in building a better mail app and a better calendar app. So I think people should focus on building a better translation app and kind of just compete with Apple and sort of build something better. I think the most interesting thing I translate or kind of these translations are happening on device and offline. So I found that to be sort of one of the most surprising things about kind of the translation stuff. It's like the 11 languages that they launched it with are offline and kind of on device. Yes. And sort of I think that's going to be difficult from a technology perspective to compete with, from my limited knowledge of building translation apps.
Yeah. We didn't have much time to discuss. There was so much that we didn't actually get time to discuss the amount of references to privacy there were throughout the WWDC 2020 keynote. But there was a lot, even things like Apple Pencil Scribble for the iPad. They talked about privacy and it all being on machine when you copy and paste things and cut things, and that was a huge theme once again that ran through it. And perhaps, someone's in our chat has said that they don't trust Google. Perhaps privacy is going to be one of the advantages Apple has in the translation space. But first of all, while we're all together, I want to thank our panel. We will come back just to say goodbye properly, I believe, at the end. But for now, I think the lovely people at MacPaw are going to send us all into some breakout rooms where we can have a chat.